whenever normal people come over to my house and see all the game systems that I have in my collection, they're either amazed, bewildered, or some combination of the two. And a question that is always going to come up no matter what is, which game system is my favorite? And that's a hard question to answer because I really like all of these systems. Except for the N64. I'm not really a big fan of the N64, but I really do like a lot of these systems. I love the Genesis, even though I don't have many games for it. I love the Atari for just how much charm that it has. I love the GameCube, even though the disc drive is starting to fail on it, unfortunately. I love the Super Nintendo so much. I wish I had more games for that, and I'm hoping to fix that in the future. But usually, whenever I answer this question, it comes down to two systems. First of all, the NES. Now, the NES is just a classic game console. When you think of retro video game, this is probably the first system that you'll think of. It is so iconic, and it has so many great games on it. I love this system so much, and some days it does feel like my favorite game system. But if I had to choose, and this changes every once in a while, so maybe later down the line, my new favorite console will be the Super Nintendo once I get more games for it. But usually, whenever people ask this question, for the last about 5 years or so, the answer has always been the Sega Dreamcast. The Sega Dreamcast is, right now, my favorite game console of all time. I love everything about it. I wish that it was more commercially relevant, but in a way, it not being a successful console makes me love it even more so. Now, the Sega Dreamcast has been talked about in length by so many different people on the internet over the years, so I'm not going to go over the comprehensive history of the Sega Dreamcast. You can watch other videos for that. I'll put a card up to a video that's really good for that. I'll choose that later. I can't really think of one right now, but I will think of one later. But this isn't the video for that. This isn't me trying to go over the entire history of it. This is just going to be a general overview and the reasons why I like it. If you want to see something that's a little bit more comprehensive overall about the system, there's plenty of videos for that. But this is all about what I love about the Sega Dreamcast. So the Dreamcast came out in September of 1999 here in North America, and this is the standard console that shipped to stores nationwide. It's pretty simple design, but a very effective one. I like the little not dimples. That's the other way around. I don't know. I just like these little geometric little shapes here that go around the disk drive. I like the little buttons here for opening the disk drive and the power button and the satisfying click of it. It's really nice. And how it sticks. I don't know why I did that. And then you got the inside of the Dreamcast. You can see that this one is a little bit yellowed over the years. I don't really know how that happened because the modem is completely white like original, but everything else is yellowed. I don't know how that happened. I love the Dreamcast logo as well, and there it is on top of the system. I love the orange swirl so much. I really love everything about the Sega Dreamcast, and the design of it is very cool. I think that it still fits in with modern technology. I mean, a lot of ways, the PS5, the way it's designed, kind of reminds me of the Sega Dreamcast and all the curves and stuff that it has on it. It's very cool. And something interesting for the time, now the Nintendo 64 did this, but it was still fairly uncommon in the day to see 4 controller ports on the front of a game system, and the Sega Dreamcast had that from the get-go. Even for like stuff like the PS2, you had to use a multi-tap for 4-player games, so that's pretty cool to see. And then here on the back, you see the modem here, which I talked about a little bit. The Sega Dreamcast was one of the first systems to have built-in online connectivity in a game console. It's very interesting, and I've actually used this. I've actually used this modem to go online, and subsequently charged up the phone bill for my parents a little bit. That was not a very good idea, but I did browse the web on the Sega Dreamcast, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Over here, you have the AV out. You can use different kinds of connectors for this. You can have standard composite. There's even an RF modulator for the Dreamcast that I discovered recently. I didn't even know that was a thing, but I don't even know why the hell you would use that, but it is an option if you have an old TV. You can also use S-Video, which is what I primarily use it with. You can also, if you're crazy, you can get a VGA cable for this and plug it into a computer monitor and use it that way if you're really looking for quality. And there's even HDMI cables for this, as far as I'm aware. I'm not really worried about the quality, though. I like having the original output for my game systems for the most part, so I try to go for S-Video because while it's not a great connector, it is better than standard composite, so it does look good on TVs that have it, and my TV does, so I like using that. It also has a serial cable right here. Probably one of the main reasons why the Sega Dreamcast failed on the market was how easy it was to bootleg the system and put your own backups of games on the Dreamcast, your own pirated copies and stuff like that. And the serial cable played a big role in that. And also another interesting thing about the Sega Dreamcast, and this was about the generation when this started becoming common, but had a built-in power supply, which was not very common up until the point that the Sega Dreamcast was released, so that's still really cool to have. And it's pretty standard plug too, so you don't have to worry about having a proprietary power cable, and if you lose it, then you're gonna have to find a replacement and spend a whole bunch of money. I'm looking at you, Atari 7800. Fuck you and your stupid ass power supply. Fucking hate how hard that is to find, but here you don't have that issue. And then you get into the controller, and I actually really like the Dreamcast controller. Usually for people, you either love it or you hate it, and I'm in the camp that loves it. Especially when you have two VMUs, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, this is what the controller looks like. Feels pretty good in the hands. I have pretty small hands as it is, so this controller actually fits it pretty well. I think for people with like bigger hands, it's a little bit more awkward, a little bit more cramped, but for me it's perfectly fine. If you're used to like an Xbox button layout, this will be completely foreign to you, and sometimes I even have trouble figuring out the button placement on this. The one downside of this controller for me, there's a couple of them, but the one major downside of this is that there isn't a second analog stick, which the DualShock came out in, I think, 1999, around the time that the Dreamcast released, so I guess Sega didn't really have the foresight to include a second analog stick, and I'm sure that if the Dreamcast was more relevant in the game market, they would have released a two joystick variation of this controller, but they never did. But the one joystick is pretty fine. Another downside about it is that the joystick is a little bit stiff because it's made out of hard plastic. It has a convex top to it. It's kind of domed, as you can see right there. So it's not the best. But it does control very well. It is still centered after all these years, still works really well. Something that the Nintendo Switch definitely can't say for itself. And the D-pad is fine, but most games don't actually use the D-pad for much things, so you don't have to really worry about it being not the greatest D-pad, but honestly, kind of gets the job done. I really can't complain about it too much. And then you got a start button here. This one's kind of sticky. I need to clean this out after a while, but yeah. Little start button here, it's pretty cool. And the interesting thing about the Sega Dreamcast, since the memory cards go into the controller itself at the top, there wasn't any spot for the actual cord to come out, so they came out the bottom, like this. And then you'd have this little tab on the back here, where you can put the controller cable in. And it fits in like that. It's kind of a jank way of getting around it, but it works pretty fine. Here you have the analog triggers, which I wish more game consoles had analog triggers. I think analog movement in video games being a dying fad is a complete tragedy. Like, hold on. This is completely irrelevant to the actual discussion here, but I really want to see the paddle controllers from the Atari come back. I think analog control in video games is incredibly underused and could be well suited for so many different types of games. I really just want this kind of control back. Why did it ever die off? Why is everything got to be digital now? It's so fucking stupid. But that aside, the really cool thing about the controllers is the VMUs. And these are the virtual memory units. These hold a very small amount of data on them, but the cool thing about them is that they have their own little LCD screen, and whenever you're playing a game, it will show little things right there, and some games will utilize them more than others. Like, for example, hold on, let me get the game. In a game like NFL 2K1, you could actually select your plays on the VMU. So like when you're playing multiplayer, you and a friend can have your own VMUs and select your plays on the VMU so they don't see which one you're selecting, which is very cool. Very cool use of it. Sonic Adventure would use it for the Chow Garden and stuff like that. Just, you can put little games on here and stuff like that. It's very charming piece of technology, and it's got its own little D-pad and buttons and stuff. It's really cool. The only downside to these is that they make a death-defying screech whenever you turn on the console, just to let you know that they're in. It's kind of weird, but whatever. Mine actually has 2 VMUs in it, and one of the cool things about it is since you are using it as a memory card, what you could do is if you had a friend who also had a Dreamcast and you wanted to swap data between 2 systems, you could just hook them up like that, and then they would sync up, and then you could trade files over each ones, and it's pretty cool. Like, this is the kind of forward thinking that I wish game consoles still had, instead of just being boring boxes that just downloaded games on a server. Like, video game consoles are so fucking boring nowadays. I want more stuff like this. I want more ridiculous shit like this. Come on. This is why the Dreamcast is awesome. And then this is the plug for the Sega Dreamcast controller. It plugs into the system, like so. Again, 4 controller ports. Very cool. There's a lot of other different control methods for this. The Dreamcast had a mouse, a keyboard, which both were really good for in games like Quake and Phantasy Star Online, and Sega Fishing Controller. I wish I had that, because I actually have Sega Bass Fishing, and I would love to use it, but I've only ever seen one in person, and that was like way before I got a Dreamcast, so unfortunately kind of missed the boat on that, and those are kind of expensive nowadays, but this thing had a fishing controller. I mean, this was before the Wii came out, and like it was normal to just have batshit weird accessories come out for game systems, so that's just really cool. On top of that, you also had the Sega microphone that would be used for things like Seaman and other weird games like that. I think it was also used for like some like online chat as well, which is still very advanced for its time. This game console in general is just very advanced for its time, and that's what I really admire about it, is how much functionality is packed into one device from this time period, because when you put it into the perspective of when this came out, it's incredible that any of this was even possible in 1999. But sadly, it wasn't meant to be. This console only lasted about 2 years on the market. As most of us know, the PS2 blew it out of the water. Sega had already tarnished its legacy with the Sega Saturn, the 32X, and other things like that. Ruined a lot of their business relationships with game developers. And unfortunately, as cool as the Dreamcast was, it wasn't able to overcome all the mounting bullshit that Sega had piled on in the late 90s and succumbed to pretty much its own demise. Pretty much Sony just blew it out of the water, and any chance of the Sega Dreamcast becoming commercially relevant afterwards was pretty much eliminated. So in about 2001 in North America and Japan, pretty much everything stopped with it, and about mid-2002 in European markets, which is a real shame. The Sega Dreamcast really should have had a better chance at success. I think that if things had gone a little bit different, if the Saturn was just a little bit better, maybe the Sega Dreamcast would have been a really big hit, and we would still have Sega in the hardware business, but who knows? We will never know. Time told the tale, and the tale was that the Sega Dreamcast ultimately had to fail. But that certainly does not mean that this game system is not worth getting nowadays. The Sega Dreamcast is a little bit more expensive to collect for, but if you do find this for a good price, definitely pick it up, because there are some great games for this system. Like I showed before, NFL 2K1, the Sega sports games were really good for their time as far as simulation sports games go. Highly acclaimed in its day, and even nowadays. You talk about games like NFL 2K5, one of the biggest, one of the most acclaimed football games of all time. Of course, it didn't come out on the Sega Dreamcast, but Sega Sports really had it made with their sports games, like NHL 2K, NBA 2K, a lot of really solid sports titles for the Sega Dreamcast, and these are dirt cheap. I mean, this is $3.99. I bought this about 2 years ago, and it's still $3.99 nowadays. They're basically worthless because everybody had them on their system. It's like any other game system. Like you see like Xbox 360 era sports games, they're all the same price because they're a dime a dozen. You can see them anywhere. You can go to places that don't even carry video games and still see Madden there. So same sort of thing here. Really cool though, because these games are definitely worth picking up. And then you also have the classics, Crazy Taxi, great arcade game. Sega GT, really good racing game. I really love racing games, so that's the majority of what I've got on these systems. But Sega GT, really cool. I really need to play through this more. Sega Rally 2, I cannot say enough about this game, and I'm definitely going to be reviewing it soon. Sega Rally 2, fantastic game. Definitely, this is a must-have for the Sega Dreamcast. If you have a Sega Dreamcast and you don't have Sega Rally 2, what the hell are you doing? This is a great game. Pick it up immediately. I don't care how much it is. It's worth it. And then you have Virtua Tennis, another great Sega sports game. I don't think it's under the Sega Sports branding, but it is a really good game. Virtua Tennis, super cool. And then the Sega Dreamcast web browser, like I was talking about, that you could go online and play online games with the Sega Dreamcast. It also had its own web browser, so you could browse the web, do email and stuff like that. Super cool. Doesn't really work well nowadays, but there are other ways that you can get online with it, like DreamPie and stuff like that. Like I said, if you watch other videos about the Sega Dreamcast, you'll undoubtedly learn about all that stuff. Not really going to get into it much there, but Dreamcast web browser is pretty cool. And so that's basically an overview of the Sega Dreamcast and just why I love it. I mean, I could go on all day about why I love this system, but I mean, it has so much charm. For a system that flopped commercially, it has so much charm, so much packed into it, that there's just endless amounts of fun that you can have with the Sega Dreamcast. There's other systems out there that I don't even think quite match up with the amount of fun that the Sega Dreamcast offers, like the Genesis and stuff like that. There's an argument to be made about systems like that and the NES and stuff like that. Even the NES, the system that is probably my second favorite right now, I still think that the Dreamcast offers just a little bit more, at least for me, that just keeps me coming back to it time and time again. It's a fantastic system. If you see it for like $60-$70 and it has all the hookups and a controller, at least one controller, you'll have a blast, I promise you. So yeah, that's basically it about the Sega Dreamcast. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, I'll see you all later. Bye bye.